Good morning, Misfits. You are tuning into another episode of the Misfit Podcast. Full Goon Squad is back.
Yo.
Stop.
And we have a guest today. The very first woman that we ever sponsored, Alexis Johnson. That was that was almost a decade ago. So I was about to say she's been in the sport for a decade, but she's been in the sport for longer than a decade. She's been to the CrossFit Games, I believe 4 times, 2 individual, 2 team. Is that correct, Sherb?
That does sound correct.
It's closest to correct as we are going to be without looking it up right now.
True.
And we had a really, really good conversation with her. I think it's unique to have someone who's been in the sport that long, who is now starting to PR at a rate that she hasn't in years. She's navigating, the concept of having a full-time job and making certain things in her personal life a priority, but still giving a lot into training. We get into some athlete IQ stuff. Rather than me tell you every single thing in the episode, why don't you listen to it? Without further ado, Alexis Johnson. Alexis, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I think we're good. Yeah.
Hanging in there.
I think so.
Everyone's doing well, I think. I didn't check in with these guys before the podcast started. Let's start life update. Where do you live? How is your training going? What do you do for work? All that good stuff. Let the people know what's up with Alexis.
All right. Well, I think last we talked, I was probably still teaching and probably in Minnesota or something. Last anyone had an update. And then I quit my job as a professor. I decided that just wasn't for me. At that point, I had started studying some machine learning and things at the time and ended up getting connected with a remote position doing machine learning and in developing AI for a software company. So it's great. I have a lot of flexibility in my schedule. I still have a full-time job. So, there's some time constraints there, but definitely I am a lot more lucky than people with a 9-to-5.
So you're going to be responsible for the Terminator is what you're saying.
Yeah, I will be happily have a conversation with people about why computers will not officially go on and kill everyone and take over the world, but we're a long way from that.
Thank goodness I'll be gone by then.
Are you mostly remote? Are you just remote, Alexis? Or you go into an office?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
no,
nice.
I have the opportunity in office if I really wanted to, but if I showed up, everyone would look very confused and puzzled and have no idea why someone that is not in marketing or sales and doesn't have to be there once a week would show up. So yeah, I do actually now. I'm currently I'm bunking with my parents for the couple months around the holidays. I had moved out to Tennessee to be on a team out there. Yeah. And that's all I'll say. And I still do my car and some of my things are still there, but I wanted to come back and spend the holidays with my parents. And I have that flexibility, which is really nice.
So team last year, what's the goal this year?
The goal is team again. And I don't know
You're working on it?
The other teammates would like me to say anything, but we do have a team together. Okay. It is a very promising team, one that I'm very excited about. I think Sherb does know all of those team members at this point, and I think we do have, we're going to make a very strong run for podium, and if not, first place.
So training, you have the full-time job, but you have flexibility. What does your training schedule look like right now?
Yep. So I generally wake up. I try not to set extreme early wake ups for me. I sleep very well in the mornings. So, I like to get up around 7:30, earlier really. At that point, I generally take my dog for a walk first thing in the morning or do something to move a little bit first thing in the morning, but there's only so much time that I have, and I know the dog needs to be walked and I need to move. So that's what we do. And then I'll sit down and do work for as long as I need to, or through my first meeting, whatever it needs to be, whatever I need to get done the most urgent things for work for the day. Otherwise, those kind of loom over my head throughout training, and that's never good. At that point, when I get to a good stopping point, usually like somewhere between 10 and 11:30, I get up and I go to the gym. The earlier, the better. I like to be able to have all of that energy when I first go into the gym. But it's the certain point, something else pays the bills, and something else is something that I'm going to do for the rest of my life, and something I'm very passionate about and want to be good at and want to continue to excel at and move forward with. So like, it's most important for me to get those things done. And then workout, I tend to get everything done in one session just because of the warm-up, cool-down time and travel time from the gym, taking time out of my schedule. It's most beneficial for me to get it all done at once. So I try to put 3 hours on my watch and in and out of the gym from warm-up to the time that I leave. And then go home, do work. I work through lunch. I work through dinner. I generally eat most of my lunch while I'm at the gym, kind of between pieces. And but work through dinner, end up hopefully at a stopping point around 8 p.m. Watch a little TV to wind down, or read a book to wind down, and that's it. That's essentially about every day for me.
So I asked that question for a couple of reasons. One, because I think it's really important to provide an opportunity for listeners to relate to athletes at a higher level that still have, I don't want to say a life, because that might insinuate something about someone who doesn't have a job or whatever, but just you've got a lot going on, but you're still able to prioritize where you're at. And then that second layer I'm basically going to hand it off to Sherb to try and work through it on the podcast with you. But you can tell me if this is revisionist history at all, but you went from starting CrossFit to a regionals level athlete fairly quick. Now we fast forward almost a decade, roughly a decade, somewhere in that range, which is crazy, right?
We're getting old.
Yeah. And you are posting some PRs. You seem to have a lot of momentum in your training. So it's a double-edged sword to get really good so quick and then have to deal with, how do I get better over this, over that longer time horizon? And you are still getting better. So I'm really fascinated in sort of this mix of people relating to you, and then, maybe a peek behind the curtain, and you and Sherb can get into it. But you seem to be making some really great progress, which is not easy with how long you've been doing it and how quick that rise was at the beginning.
A lot of that comes from working with Sherb. I started working with him about 2 years ago, and there's obviously that transition period of getting used to a new coach, him getting used to me, and like kind of how we work together, how we communicate, how I tell him when something was going good and something's going bad, and then start getting used to each other, and things kind of took off. The other thing was, like you said, I think that puts it in perspective. I got good fairly quickly. It was a product of the timing and my background, and just where the sport was at the time. But because of that, 2015, 2016 rolls around, and at that point I'm a few years into the sport, and I kind of still wanted things to progress as quickly as they had, and I didn't look at the big picture, and I caused myself a lot of problems by not looking at the big picture. I still wanted those immediate benefits. I didn't see them, so I started overtraining, and I continued to overtrain for years, and I kind of didn't see PRs for a long time. Was dealing with injuries. I guess I was never actually like muscularly sore. The only thing keeping me down was that I literally couldn't move because my joints hurt so bad. And none of that did I even reflect on to say, hey, maybe you're doing something wrong. It was always like, no, you're not making progress fast enough, do more. And that was a huge detriment and something that I learned from finally now a decade later, but I spent probably 6 years hammering myself into the ground over that stuff.
Yeah. If I'm going to put it into like a visual, gaining real perspective in life typically isn't like skipping through a meadow of beautiful flowers. You go through what you feel like is right and what you feel like is wrong, and you do all of these things and you end up in this other place. So that's another piece of the relatability is like, you kind of got to go through some stuff to figure this out, because it's super easy for us to sit in our purple chairs here and say, well, you should do this and you should do this and you should do this. But without the athlete having experiences, both good and bad, and somewhere in the middle, I think you're really going to be able to figure, what works for you on a personal level.
Mm-hmm. And I'd say a big part of that too, Alexis, early on when you're talking about the feeling out period, was just like getting to trust that I had your best interests in mind. And that is a thing that happens with remote coaching. And this is something I've experienced with every single athlete I've ever worked with, is that when you start with an athlete, at first, they're going to question you a lot about why this, not that, why not more of this, not why less of that. And it's hard at first to put those expectations on hold because of what you just described. Most athletes train at a volume that is inappropriate for them early on, and honestly, as they try to get better, not because they're like, fuck it, let's just do a bunch of things. They're like, I have to play catch up. I'm so far behind. This is the only way I close the gap. And I think the conversations you and I had early on were, hey, let's see where you're currently at with your fitness. Let's look at the way you're moving through things, and let's just make sure we're not doing things for the sake of doing things, but let's pay attention to the finer points. Because, I remember, around the 15, 16, years where it was, my knees were jacked up and I can't jump, or my calves were jacked up and I can't do it. Or, more recently, my elbow and my wrist have been giving me trouble. Like, making sure we're paying attention to some more of the finer points of training that aren't just like, did I hit pieces A through F today on the blog? And I really do think it'd be insightful for everybody else for you to describe kind of the, I don't know, I must say, like, Goldilocks zone that we've come to of training, where we understand like what the jet stream is, like what is the right amount of training that allows you to continue to get better.
I had to stop looking at the entire blog. That was the first thing for me mentally, because even to this day, as much as I know I think I know what my body can handle and what's best for me, the moment I look on the blog and I'm like, oh, everyone else is doing that piece, I totally needed to do that piece. Like, and so then it's in my head, and then I just, I do it, I can't pull myself away from that feeling of, hey, everyone else is doing that and they got better because they did that and I didn't do it.
Yeah, it feels like the missing piece.
Yes. And it's always going to look like that. There's, the grass is always greener on the other side. That comes, from as big of a picture as switching programs to coaches to, just looking at what someone else is doing in training, even if they're doing nearly the same thing. It's always, oh, but they did it this way. Like, if I had done it that way, I would be better. So there was, for me, that was probably the biggest thing, is I needed to stop looking at the entire blog. I actually started to do it yesterday and closed that tab. So
I'm gonna interrupt you for 1 second, because this is a really important point for everybody looking at the blog. The blog is every single thing that I think could potentially fit in terms of a remote coach saying, this has got to go, this slides in. What happens when you have a program where everything's a bit more rigid and you start to add, you're trying to add things in, it's really hard to know exactly where they go, what sort of central nervous system demand there is, should this movement be with that movement. So I take a lot of the guesswork out for an athlete who wants to personalize and a remote coach who wants to help their athlete. Because again, you can build these templates and you can build all these separate things, but then you go to overlay them on another program and it's like, shit, this doesn't fit. I'm pressing here and I'm pressing here and I'm pressing here again, and I'm going overhead. Like, it's a lot of work. So in my mind, it's like, I want to expand this out to, this day could provide basically everything that an athlete could need, not what they need. So as the blog grows, I'm like, if you're watching, my hands are moving left to right, creating a wider gap. I am providing best case scenarios, and there are multiple scenarios built within a day. Nobody is supposed to do all of that. There is not a single person who should be doing 3 high intensity conditioning pieces a day, every day. They don't exist. I don't care. You get, some of the 19, 20, 21-year-olds, and they sprinkle in a few of those days every once in a while. But that's going to lead to what you were talking about. So I just think for listeners, if you're looking at all of it and you are feeling that way, I'm not writing that shit for anybody. No one. It's so that everyone can have what they potentially should need.
I got a question for you, Alexis. Are you still trained? You're not, correct me if I'm wrong. Are you still co-located with Sophie?
Yeah,
right now.
She's actually not at this gym right now.
Okay.
I train with is at a gym there's a gym that's 3 minutes from my house. And then there's the gym that Sophie's going to, which is like 20 minutes from my house. During the work week, that's 40 minutes that I could be training, and instead I'm driving. So while there's like a benefit to training with someone, I don't drive out there every day of the week to train. Plus, to get our schedules to match up, it's not always the same. Not always great, anyways.
Okay, yeah. I wanted to clarify that, but my question is that so you've spent time with various different types of training partners. With Sophie being younger, did you find that you kind of stepped into almost a little bit more of a like coaching and mentorship role for someone like that? And if so, what are some of the things that you've kind of taken away from that sort of thing where you're now expected to be an example for somebody who's up and coming in the sport, and maybe not her specifically, but just in general?
I think with everything in life, you gain a lot of knowledge by teaching. I always felt like I needed to teach someone something. I actually learned it better myself as I taught it. So I think it went the same way with a lot of kind of just being around Sophie, and it from as much as how do you interact with everyday members of the gym to and not seem like an asshole when you're on your own in the corner breathing heavy, to like how do you approach workouts. And then don't get me wrong, there's things and plenty of things that Sophie beats my ass in, and it doesn't just go one way.
The stuff she's good at, she is terrifyingly good at.
Yeah. I have yet to learn anything from that because I continue to get my ass beat in those things. But I think there's definitely a bit of a mentorship role, but I think we both benefit from that.
Yeah, I think the things that you're good at, she struggled with, and vice versa, so that, you make proper training partners where, like, you're not just smoking someone because, like, oh, they're terrible at this, and, like, I'm just going to show them how it's done. Like, you change the mindset of how she approached things, and then some of the ways that she, like, moved in, like, an Olympic lifting, for example, you're like, all right, maybe I should consider doing some of these things as well. And that's really the beauty of a training partner, is to try to look at them as like a comparison to yourself and be like, all right, what about the way they move or the way they do things allows them to do that? And how do I close the gap between where I am and where they are?
Have you seen, kind of expanding a little bit on the same question, have you seen, or you guys had instances where maybe you're observing either her training or just like maybe not necessarily in a very specific instance over a certain period of time, and you've been like, I see what's happening here. Like, come over here, kid. We're going to have a conversation. Like, I need to, like, let's reorient or steer you in the right direction. Or, maybe she's doing something that you saw yourself doing a while ago, and you kind of try to point like, hey, don't make the same mistake I made, so to speak. Like, does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. There has been some things in terms of just questioning volume or questioning, she'll tell me she's feeling a certain way, and I'm like, have you told Sherb this? Because we both work with Sherb. And, have you, no, I'm just going to wait and see. No, he can't read your mind. You need to tell him now so that he can make changes for the coming weeks.
Thank you.
Things like that. And then things like, oh, hey, why do you put your feet like that on the rope? You're pointing them down and then they're sliding down. That's because you're pointing them down. Or things that I've learned, like potentially if I was going to change, if I was very uncomfortable with climbing rope, there's actually, one of these methods where you can kind of, it's a reverse of what you would generally do, and the rope goes behind your calf. And for someone who has trouble sliding down, I tend to actually think that method's really cool. And someone who does a lot of pulls already, maybe it's worth trying. So there are things I think I've been too exposed to in the sport that it's like, okay, if I still had years to go in the sport, I think it would be worth learning to do something this way because I can see situations where it would be useful. Whereas I'm like, well, I don't have many years left. Teach an old dog new tricks, not really worth it. But if I had 10 years left, I would totally want to learn to do it that way. So I've kind of mentioned a few of those things to her too.
I think the biggest thing that you kind of lent yourself to helping her with is just understanding like the nuances and how detail oriented you have to be the best version of yourself. I'd say that's something that you do at a level that is exceptional relative to anybody else that I work with, is that you know, we'll tell you to do, or I'll tell you to do something one way, and it's not just, yes, I'll do it. It's like, why? And you want to know why, because you're interested in the explanation of what I have to say to you, but you're also interested for your own curiosity because, you know, we might teach something one way and you might have a different perspective on it and you want to have a conversation about it and, you know, not just going into things blind. And I think of all the things that, you know, was most beneficial for her experience with you, and I think that you obviously can, you know, like you said, if you teach it, you know it better for yourself, is that ownership over your own athlete IQ and knowing things going into training and how valuable that data is, and knowing when to change your approach or change the way you're doing a movement because it may be more advantageous to do it this way versus that way, even if it's less maybe technically proficient in the eyes of an Olympic weightlifting coach, because you think it's the right approach there. And I going back in my mind, I can just remember there was like a echo bike piece and you're like, have you ever watched her knees when she bikes? And you were referring to the outward angle of the legs instead of being able to compress the pedals straight down.
Sherb on a tricycle.
Yeah, exactly. The knees were flying out to the side, and you're like, have you ever talked about this?
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's a real life example.
But the real deal here is that, like, how much efficiency is she bleeding by pushing her knees out? And that's perspective that, like, because I'm not going to watch every single interval because I'm not there. She's with her and she's going, hey, fix this one problem. Like, you are a crazy powerful athlete, but you're bleeding all your power away because you've got an outward angle of the knee. And these are things that I think is really valuable about your experience, you know, having done it now and saying, all right, I've tried things 15 different ways and I found that this one of the 15 ways is most efficient. Try it this way. So I, you know, not to answer your question for you, but like that's the biggest thing that I've seen kind of you go back and forth is helping her understand how much ownership you need to have over your own training. It's not like, oh, well, I forgot what happened last time. I'm just going to try it again a different way this time. It's like, no, like go back and look at how you did it last time and ask yourself what your pace should be or how many steps you should take or where you should break. And that's going to help you get better at this sport.
I am curious if and how, you'll understand what I'm saying. I'm curious if your opinion on comparing scores on a regular basis has changed, evolved over the years, because there's definitely something with how I'm trying to sort of direct the community in that way and how you guys can use each other. But I would like to hear your opinion, like 2016 Alexis versus 2022 Alexis, in terms of comparing your scores in training, not in testing.
2016, 2017 Alexis wouldn't do a single Metcon without knowing a score. Or like trying to put up a score to beat. And 2016, 2017 Alexis got pretty damn good doing that. So I don't know that I can say it's a bad thing. I was also doing too much volume. So what contributed to my body getting hurt was, I can't say it was the score comparing, but it was probably more the volume. Nowadays, I don't want to hurt that bad every single day when I walk in the gym. This is why I'm not individual anymore. I have other things in my life. If I put that much effort into the gym where I'm going 100% every day and I don't have the energy to get other things in my life done that matter to me now, that's not a place where I want to be. So would I still be getting a lot better if I was comparing scores every day? I think it's beneficial to do at least probably 3-4 Metcons a week where you're going hard comparing a score. Something that, you know, even if it's just, hey, I went 95% or 90%, but my scores were way off. Even if it's that kind of score comparison, that's more of what I do now, because it gives me, and it gives me a gauge as to what I really need to work on, because I'm like, okay, even if I'd went 100%, I'd come nowhere close to those people. And I still do go 100% often in these workouts. And a lot of times it's in my like monostructural work or things I really want to work on right now. But I'm not to the point where I was in 2016, 2017, where I had a training partner I was working with that I was pushing myself to my max every day. I was simulating that competition environment. If I hadn't given my workout my all, I'd come back the next day and redo it because I was so disappointed in myself.
That's actually the perfect word, I think, because I think the risk is more mental than physical when it comes to that stuff. The amount of mental energy that you would expend looking at other scores, sort of obsessing over yours, that sort of thing, which oftentimes, depending on the type of athlete, may or may not actually yield a lower score. This is a high stress situation. It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. How did I turn this into the CrossFit Games? So I would say that part of it is like, you know, we talk a lot about the gas tank that you have as an athlete, and the physical and mental side are both pulling from it. So maybe the volume or the intensity wasn't necessarily the issue, but if the stress is there, you have less overall resources to go to.
And I'd say, sorry, go ahead, Alexis, go ahead.
I can believe that. I mean, there were times I would like lose sleep thinking about things that were coming up. That was more weakness work, but still, like, and that definitely was detrimental to who I was as an athlete.
Yeah, I think the perspective that I'm hoping athletes can wrap their mind around and even create their own definition of is this idea of whether you are the pace setter for the day or if someone else is your pace setter for the day. And then just understanding that as much as you would want to, you can't snap your fingers and become one or the other. You can't switch back and forth whenever you want. So when an athlete sees, oh my goodness, I held a 149, she held a 144, you can't just go hold a 144 in most instances. Sometimes you just know that you sandbagged it and you got to prove something to yourself. What I like about it is I now have a standard that's floating out there. I know that if I do 10 similar sessions over the course of the season, can I knock a second or a half a second off and end up where I want to be at a certain point? I just think that so many people get bogged down on the day-to-day one-to-one comparisons that it can become really challenging to deal with that. So like there are plenty of things that you know that are wheelhouse for you. And when you put a score in, what that does is it lets other people know like, wow, so I'm supposed to be trying to get this done in 2 sets and then hold this. And she had to have had, just doing the math, she had to have had quick transitions, whatever it is. I think it provides people with like, oh, wow, this is what's possible out there. And if the community's big enough and shares enough scores, you should be able to have that basically in any scenario.
I like thinking of it that way. And like, I think back to like last test time, not for this upcoming cycle, but for last cycle, there were a couple things that were very good for me. I mean, the EMOM of skiing where you added a calorie, That's just like, it's a great workout for me. It's a long workout. It's just head down, just push through some things and like, just push through the pain. Just one more this time. Just one more this time. That's what I tell myself all the time. And it's a great workout for me. I also kind of did it in an opportune situation where I was really focusing on those things and my training. Like I was focusing on my monostructural and my strength work. I wasn't really focusing on some of the other parts of my training. So like I put up a very respectable score for those things. But to be honest, like I put it up knowing that if I had put the same like effort into other parts of training, that score would have been much closer to these other scores. So I have to kind of see scores posted now as like, it's a reflection of where that person is in their training, also how good they are at that workout, but also, what did they put effort into that day?
Mm-hmm. And the perspective is similar to what you talked about a couple podcasts ago where like, you don't know this might be this person's wheelhouse workout and you feel terrible because you fell a minute behind them. But like the CrossFit Games are on the line. That's the workout they'd want to be the final. And you're like, fuck, it's not a workout for me. So you don't know that information going into it, which is, again, gives you hope to see like what's possible, but like shouldn't ruin your day if that happens.
Yeah, and our community's large. So the example that I gave in the podcast, Alexis, because I think we know this is your first listen of the podcast.
Unbelievable.
Some of our athletes were at the Madrid Championship, and the division was gigantic. It was like elite was like 60 people or something. It was a very big competition, and there were like 7 or 8 games athletes there. And that provides a really unique perspective. And you actually probably could have given me much better analysis of these numbers, but you have, because it's that big of a sample size, your athletes who go and take top 10, top 15, top 20 in the world at the CrossFit Games were coming in 12th, 16th, 19th, 35th, 29th. The scores were all over the place. And I just read at the beginning, like, if these are CrossFit Games athletes and they're going up against someone who doesn't even qualify for semifinals and they're losing, you can gain the perspective of, again, it's Tuesday, it's 2 p.m., the sample size is really large. You're going to get, that's why, the open scores can be crazy. You're like, who's this? Like, it's just so many factors that are brought into it. And I think that's what can allow people to be like, wow, I don't know who Joe Schmo is, but he's either lying or he's the standard today. And, when it happens in competition, then it's kind of obvious that it's very possible that if you have enough parity within all of these different things, your scores are there's going to be a big gap.
Are sports getting to that point now? It
Absolutely.
It didn't used to be there. This is the first time, the last couple of years, the first time we're seeing this. People are getting so good at certain things, and people that are not necessarily who you would deem as competitive on, the games level or a semis level are still able to come in and win a workout here and there, because the field's getting much deeper than it used to be.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just, I think it sets a really good example for people to understand that we're trending towards, it's impossible to be that person, no matter who you are, that comes in when, we're obsessed with variance, that you're not going to land on something that makes you feel like, oh shit, this is not my wheelhouse.
I think,
Been there.
I think an interesting thing that we could talk about too is you just alluded to the fact like what your training consists of. It's basically strength work and bitch work, a lot of monostructural conditioning. I know why we do that. I think you know why we do that. Maybe you want to tell everybody else why that's what we've been doing as kind of our main features in training. Why those things as opposed to like, why aren't we doing more intervals or more Metcons or, something else?
I'm generally pretty good. I've done CrossFit long enough where I'm, most of the movements are there for me. Although it feels like they go away, I do them for a month leading up to something and they're all back already. So for me, my weaknesses or things that are not that great always are my monostructural work. I can do long workouts, but if it comes to even long monostructural stuff, I'm going to struggle a bit. I struggle with some power output things. So those 30-second assault bike repeats. And then in terms of strength, I don't think it's a secret that that's forever been something that has kind of held me back a little bit. So that my body gets a lot less beat down doing these sorts of things. And this time in the season, it's really important to keep my body healthy. If it's November right now and I'm already dealing with some nagging things, and we continue doing all this stuff, what am I going to feel like coming up to June? We might as well take this time keeping my body feeling really good and primed and, continuing to build on some things while we can and build strength where I feel really good. And then we can start moving the needle on those things later on.
Yeah, and the way I like to think of it is something Hunter actually described probably 4 or 5 podcasts ago. We like to think of the machines and monostructural work as like building energy systems in a situation where skill usually isn't the limiting factor. Like there isn't some skill element why you can't keep moving along. Like, if you're doing a handstand push-up workout and your handstand push-ups fail, like you can't keep training handstand push-ups. You have to stand there and do nothing. But a lot of these machines, you can see right on your screen if you're going faster or slower, how long you're going, and how these different time domains train different parts of your fitness. And we're able to make you very fit without doing thrusters and pull-ups every single session. And I think that's really what's attributed to making sure you stay healthy.
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
you said handstand push-ups. I haven't done one in a month. I just realized. Yeah.
That's all right. I think they're okay.
They're overrated.
That's what I heard too.
I did enough for all of us this morning.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. Let's see you guys next week.
All right, Misfits, just a quick break to shout out our show sponsors and save you some money on our favorite products. This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Sharpen the Axe. You can head to sharpentheaxeco.com, and why don't you use the code word Alexis? She's on the podcast today. You are listening to that right now, and if you use her code, she gets paid for it. We have a lot of really good fall, winter vibe stuff in the store right now. We've got joggers, we've got hoodies, we've got crew necks, we've got long sleeves, whatever your vibe is with sort of the comfy, you got to layer up, you got to get it just right, especially when you live where we live. You're going into the gym, it's cold in there, but then the second you start working out, it's too hot. And then you'll find out, actually, no, that's not on the podcast. That was afterwards. You'll find out by yourself that sometimes you get sweaty and then that becomes cold. So we got all the layers figured out at sharpentheaxeco.com. Use the code word Alexis.
We're also brought to you by Proper Fuel. You can head to properfuel.co, use the code word Misfit to save on your order. All about you guys, we just got finished through Thanksgiving, Black Friday, went to the gym on Friday morning, had a little bit of that Thanksgiving Day hangover. Turns out that it's not just sodium in the gravy and the mashed potatoes and the turkey that'll, keep you going at full speed. I realized my training was dragging because I was dehydrated from just hanging with fam and, not really caring about anything other than football and turkey. So went to the gym Friday morning. Yeah. The first thing, 2 scoops of hydrate, a nice full liter of water, which, a little more than you need, but hey, I was feeling kind of funky, need a little extra, threw that in the water, and all of a sudden training went much smoother, and all of a sudden I was feeling like myself again. So if you haven't checked out Proper Hydrate, it's your all-in-one electrolyte supplement. You can find that at properfuel.co, and you use the code word Misfit to save on your order.
And lastly, but not leastly, of course, we are brought to you by Misfit Athletics. You can head to misfitathletics.com or the SugarWOD marketplace to start your 2-week free trial. Follow the same program that Alexis is following, or maybe some of this conversation has piqued your interest in the idea of getting a Misfit Athletics remote coach. You can also apply for remote coaching on misfitathletics.com. We help you kind of take the guesswork out of your programming by paying attention to your strengths, weaknesses, goals, all those sorts of things, so that you don't have to deal with looking at the massive blog that we post up there every day, like Alexis alluded to. We can take that guesswork out of the equation for you. So head to misfitathletics.com or the SugarWOD marketplace to get started. Let's get back to the Misfit First Lady.
So one thing that I am fascinated with as a coach is this idea of year-to-year turnover with an athlete, especially as you get further and further into their career. I'm curious if there's been some sort of major shift, or if because you've only been working together for 2 years, that what is happening right now, what you're training, what you're getting into, is a continuation of what you were working on together last year.
Oh gosh. Yeah, I think we've generally, it's more of a continuation of what we had last year. I think we learned a lot around last year and, what works for me. I learned what works for me. Sadly, 10 years into the sport, finally, unfortunately had like a little bit of a worse experience early on, but in the sport. And then I got connected with Sherb, and things have been, I've learned a lot about myself through talking with him. So yeah, I think it's definitely just a continuation upon what we learned last year, what works for me, what I wanted in terms of a schedule too, and what I had time for.
Yeah, I think what you just alluded to there is a really important part of this, is just that trust factor, is that we didn't get there because I said do this and you're like, yep, got it. No, it was conversations that occurred where, you expressed your point of view and then I expressed mine, and we came to a common ground that works for both of us, where, there are going to still be times where you tell me, oh, I saw this, so I decided to do it. And it's like, maybe not the perfect thing I wanted you to do, but you don't do that every single time. You're not going rogue every single training session. You're understanding that, I have, like you said, 3 hours from the second I leave my house to the second I'm back at my house done done training that I want to make sure I make best use of that time. And one of the big changes we, enacted was, all right, we're going to just doing some math stuff. Like, you alluded to the fact that you really didn't like long monostructural pieces, and like, what better way to get better at long monostructural work than to do it weekly? And you quickly realized that all of a sudden your recovery between pieces was better. You were still getting stronger, even though, science says if you do long aerobic work, you can't get strong. Like, we're
not my science.
Clearly disproving that theory. And the only change from like last year to this year in my mind is that there's just more of the adoption of like, I really care about how I move, because I'm finding that it's making the biggest difference. And your squat PR the other day is a perfect example of that. Like, sitting in here
the good lift too.
Before Black Friday, I think I was sitting on the table with Ted and Drew, and we were having a meeting, and then you called me and you were just flipping out excited because you hit a 15-pound PR 10 years into CrossFit. And you're like, I said to myself I was going to retire when I did this, and I had to ask you not to retire. Please don't do that. But the fact that you cared so much to want to fix that, because for so many years you expressed to me that like you want to get strong, and it literally feels like you flip a coin on the day that you're going for 1 rep max, and maybe it goes better, maybe it doesn't, but it doesn't translate. It's not consistent over and over again. And I think that's the biggest change, is that you've bought into the fact that you have to really care about you move on some of the things that were stuck for a really long time. And now we're starting to inch up higher and higher because we care about that last little detail. It wasn't just like, I did it once. It's like, no, I want to do this every single time I do it.
I think I need to like elaborate on that squat PR, because it really wasn't just a product of the volume that we've been doing. It wasn't a product of just doing a squat cycle or anything like that. It came down to Sherb and I spent a lot of time working on changing my squat pattern, working on when I stand up, not shifting back, because I used to get to a point where I just kind of shift my butt back. I'm a very posterior dominated athlete. That was just the way I squatted. And then it was more of a, okay, now just open your hips to stand back up. So shift back to get your butt up, open your hips to stand up. And at that point, there was always a limiting factor, because I was never really pushing with my quads, and I was never able to really recruit them. So we spent a lot of time, and that meant a period of time where my squat, I didn't go very heavy. We basically just worked on, okay, stop when you can't, stop when that form doesn't look very good. My notes always said, I want you focusing on keeping that squat looking correct. And so that PR came out of those changes too. That was probably more due to those changes. I was stuck for a reason, no matter what, unless I made that change.
It's a really important point, because so many athletes, again, have that athlete brain. If I don't go heavy, I'm falling behind. And it's not that. It's how you move is what allows you to then move the needle in something like a lift. That for you is the biggest change, is the inconsistency in how you squatted prior, and then you fixed it to the fundamental part of it. You got it doing it correctly, and then you were consistent in how you practice it. And a 15-pound PR 10 years into CrossFit, which again is huge. That's unheard of at this point in someone's fitness journey, especially someone with the accolades that you have.
Did you find it was hard to like make that adjustment? So listening to that, I'm hoping everybody else who's listening is taking the obvious point in the room, that it's like you've got an elite athlete who's spent who's got over a decade worth of training behind them, and they decided 10 years into the sport that I'm going to completely change a movement pattern that I've relied on for the past 9.5 years, however long it was. I actually focused on it, and I PR'd by 15 pounds. What was the, like, how difficult was it to convince you to make that, to be like, hey, you want to get a stronger squat? Let's do something different.
Physically and mentally, it was hard, because you squat during everything and you squat during all of your metcons, and the movement pattern wasn't going to change if I only changed it in the random strength work that I did for 30 minutes at like a couple times a week. It had to change in everything I did, from my wall balls to my thrusters to my air squats that I was doing during, like, there was like a running air squat muscle up piece that I really remember. Like, all I focused on that whole time was like, okay, during these air squats, like, shoot your hips through, like, purposely kind of, keep your hips forward and knees forward, like these random little cues that help me, even though they'll sound like terrible cues to squat with, they help me get the right form. And so it had me, maybe taking some intensity out of things. Even that wasn't the goal, wasn't to take intensity out, but my goal was, okay, if you can fix this, it'll help all of your thrusters in the end and things like that. There was a ski thruster piece where I think each time the thrusters went up from like 10 to 40. I don't remember exactly what the piece was, but it was, it was towards the end of when I was changing this form, and all I was thinking about the whole workout was, okay, you got to squat with your, get your hips forward a little bit more, and your bar path for your thruster will be straighter. And I ended up having, for me, a decently competitive score on the ski thruster workout that I never would have had a decently competitive score on, because it's just not a great thing for me. And that was when I was like, oh yes, like the changes are starting to help even in a Metcon, not just in these strength gains.
Well, the funny thing too, Alexis, is you just said intensity might have dropped a bit. And while I might agree with you that physical intensity might have been a little bit less, mental intensity of focusing to do that is in itself intensity. And that is something that's really important for someone who maybe's in the sport early on and is like, but they said, like, don't put chest to bar skill work in my Metcon. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't do that, but it doesn't mean you can't go off to the side afterwards and really focus for a short period of time where volume is not part of the equation at all. We think back to like one of the conversations we had is like how to get someone good at chest to bar pull-ups a couple of podcasts ago. And it's like, we do ladders of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 2, 4, 6, 8, 9, or 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. That's not how you do it. But the idea here is that your volume is very, very reasonable, but you're able to be focused the entire time because the volume is reasonable. So what you're describing there is someone who is, going, all right, I might get a worse score because I have to be a little bit more deliberate with my focus and how I move. But if the end product is getting fitter and stronger and better at this sport, mission accomplished, even if that one single piece maybe is slower than other people.
Yeah, I think the original kind of point to the question, or the statement overall, was that, okay, you've got two people. You've got an athlete and coach. Coach who's saying, hey, athlete, if you want to get better at this thing that's been a historical GOAT for you, here's what we're going to do. And coach is like, this is how you're going to do it. Like, I'm going to drive this home and basically not let up on the gas, or not pump the brakes at all. It's like, this squatting's hard. This is difficult. I don't want to do it. And the coach says, okay, let's, maybe you've got that movement pattern so deeply ingrained that it's not worth fixing, kind of the rope climb example that you alluded to earlier on. And then athlete who's like, okay, I know that this has been a historical issue for me. If I want to continue to see the progress 10 years into CrossFit, I have to be willing to make these changes. And for people listening, it's like, combine those two things together, kind of commitment on both ends and a willingness to do that. And here's that's the end result. And now who knows what the season is going to look like with someone who's got whose back squat looks like their thruster, looks like their front squat. And it's not like 17 different movements that we see so often with athletes.
No, I'm not saying like I've been quite so easy to convince in other things, but I had basically like with the squat, I was like, I give up. Let's change it. Nothing is working. There are definitely other things where I'm like much more hard-headed about, and I'm like, I don't know if I think it's fine this way.
Sure, that's okay. But the point is like, you get that one thing and it's like, and it worked. It's like, coach said to do it, athlete bought into it. We both did it together. It worked. And like, that's what matters.
And that's the secret. That's our wedge. We fixed your squat as the wedge. We opened the door more and you're like, all right, I'll let you peek in and give me some more ideas after that. We know where we can try to make some sort of, because again, that trust factor isn't just day one, snap your fingers and it's there. Yeah. Both sides want to end up in that place, but things actually have to, happen over the course of time for you to get there. So I think movement patterns are one of our favorite wedges when it comes to developing trust with athletes.
I have a question regarding your training. So you're locked into team. what does your training look like as far as individual training yourself, or training by yourself, or, doing individual stuff versus team workouts? Or are you not even in that part of the kind of the season yet where the worm's out and you guys are doing synchro stuff and whatnot?
We're going to get there, starting in probably December or the beginning of January. We'll start kind of getting together as a team. Right now, still doing some individual stuff. If we were all together, maybe we would start right now doing like one workout, just kind of touching it to do like an EMOM of clean and jerks or something like that every like once a week or something, just to kind of get the pattern going. But we don't all live locally, so we're going to get together the best that we can. So right now it is all individual stuff because, to be honest, I mean, most of it comes down to individual fitness at the games, and you're always, as long as you work well together as a team and know each other's strengths and weaknesses, which is really important. And it's really important to kind of like mesh with one another. I think you can only be as good as your individual fitness. So we're definitely still training all of that. Now I should say, like, I switched to team, not because okay, let me put it this way. I have other things in my life now that matter a lot to me. And I think, while I do think I could still potentially qualify for the CrossFit Games, I would go and I would be very disappointed in myself for not, at that point, I would look back and be like, dang it, I wish I had trained harder. Dang it, I wish I had put more time into it. But throughout the year and the majority of my days, I don't care enough to put that much time into it, in the sense that I care more about other things now. CrossFit used to be the thing that I cared about the most, and I put everything into it every single day. So when I showed up to the games or when I showed up to semis, it wasn't a thing where it was like, man, I wish I had put more time into it. There was no regret in my heart. Whereas now, if I was to show up to semis, I would be so excited when I get there and be like, damn it, like, why didn't I care about CrossFit this much all these other days? And it wouldn't be fair to myself to do that kind of thing. So because when I compete, I have more passion than I do for training, it's just, like I said, it's not fair to myself, but I'm still putting more effort than the majority of people into my training and things like that. I'm not ready to give it up by any means. It just means that I want to go a step down from that. I'd rather go team than individual, so that I don't have that regret when I show up to competition.
I don't think of that as like you've said it a couple times. It's made to sound like it's a give a shit factor, and it's like, I don't care enough about this. I don't necessarily think about it that way. It seems to me that you've just identified the level, kind of the hierarchy of what's important to you in your life, and how to best maximize your ability to enjoy what you are doing. And the second part of that is that, how often do we hear athletes who are just like, it would be awesome to be a semifinals athlete or a games athlete, but it turns out that they're not really willing. They just want to go, they want to go to check in. They want to get the bundle of no bullshit and then, get their name tag and head out. And it's like, that would be cool, but the requirement to do that is this. Are you willing to do that? And a lot of people think that they are until they start doing it. And your experience and maturity level is like, would it be cool? Sure. But I know what the requirement is, and I don't, like, where I'm at in my life right now and what priorities I've set for myself doesn't align with that. So I just want people to not think of it as like, oh, I don't give a shit, so I'm going to go team. That's not the messaging that I know you're not saying that, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. I'm glad you clarified, because I still care a lot about CrossFit. I probably still too much. Like, love this sport. I pour my heart into it. I make sure I go to the gym, almost for all of my training. If I don't complete it, I'm upset. But there's things like this past Monday where work got busy, and then I had made a promise to my aunt who's in the nursing home that I would go visit her. And like those
what a
things
terrible
at this
person,
point,
unbelievable. You skipped your thrusters and pull-ups for that.
those are more to me now at this point in my life where there was a time in my life where I lived in Texas and I didn't travel home even for the holidays for 2 years because it would have taken away from training. And I was also in grad school at the time and I wasn't willing to do that. Whereas now those things kind of go above training for me. And that's okay. It's not that I care less about training. It's that these other things are more important to me in life. And I recognize that that's where I'm at and that's okay. It's just, I wasn't always at that place in my life.
Well, I think
and that was okay too.
Yeah, I think a lot of athletes think of it as a zero sum game. Like if I need to do this training or I'm not going to be happy. And it's like, well, the unintended consequences of you skipping that or doing that training piece instead of going to visit a family member, going home for the holidays, what's the long-term consequence of me skipping out on these important things that may actually be a net positive to, say, like my mental health or my, the fire that keeps burning so that I can go back, hit my training hard, but also know that, like, the other side of that coin is just as important.
We've sort of touched on what it took to get you some of your strength PRs. When it comes to the monostructural stuff, are you getting better at it? How are you getting better at it? Have you had any sort of similar aha moments with it, or is it just time on machines?
For me, it's machines and running. And yes, I took a significant hit to my row. I used to work on rowing all the time. I mean, it used to be the only machine we had, right? There was a time where we didn't have assault bikes. We didn't have C2 bikes. We didn't have ski ergs. You were either running or rowing. And when I did machine intervals, it was rowing every single time. And I got really damn good at rowing, especially for a small individual. I can still, for someone who's smaller, hold my own on the rower, but it's not nearly where I used to be. I think that has come a ways. I definitely took a huge hit when I tore my Achilles and my UCL. I couldn't row with either one of those injuries. And so being it was a weakness and I had to take a significant amount of time off of it, that really hurt me in terms of, I think a lot of that was mental too, but my muscles just kind of die on me in the middle of the row. I just don't have the pull anymore. So I think that's come a long way. My running has also, that's come a very long way just in terms of just comfort and paces. Right now I am running a bit heavy, which makes running hard for me. Probably like, a good 5 pounds heavier than I would like to compete at, in terms of being good at running, but still, I'm still much more comfortable at running. So just the fact that when I look at it, 45 minutes on those things doesn't necessarily, I lost sleep over a 10K run plenty of times previously in my life and, in my training. And now I see that and it doesn't bother me whatsoever. Running intervals, like, I'm kind of excited about them and things. So I think that just even that goes to makes a huge difference in terms of performance.
Yeah, and the thing I think I really want to harp on there is how excited you are about keeping your split the same on 5x600 meter run the way that someone would if they just PR their muscle ups. Like, that is an element to the ownership you have over your own training and how much that moves the needle for your fitness, where you care that much, where you're like, look, I ran 5 600s and they were all 2 minutes and 14 seconds. Like, I've never been able to do this. I could normally run 1 or 2 of these and then the next 3 are like 3 minutes. Like, that level of ownership is super important. If you want to get good at this sport, you need to care as much about the nitty gritty. I'm out there huffing and puffing in the cold. Like you texted me a couple days ago. It's like, running's going great, but it's cold and it sucks in the lungs. But like, I've never been able to run like this before in my life because of the way I've been paying attention to it. And like, that level is so important if you're trying to get better at this sport because of how much it impacts your fitness.
Yeah, I can tell you my strides per minute. I look at those things. I look at, at what point did all of a sudden the run start getting harder? Why did that happen? All of those things are things that I'm analyzing all the time. On the ski erg, I know, I look at the drag factor before I start. At one point during the cube test for the bike, Sherb had said, hey, your strokes per minute are pretty high. So I tried it at a higher damper and and I was like, okay, can I still hold those same paces at the higher damper? Or did I only get those scores because I had the lower damper and I'm better at the lower damper. Do I need to work on these things? These are things I'm thinking about all the time, and Sherb helps me think about those things. He brings them up. So it's nice to have that extra pair of eyes.
You guys are speaking my language now. So the running is so fascinating and should not be glossed over at all, because how would athletes feel if I took away their C2 monitors and all of these other things, and every time they got on the machine, they had to go based on feel? And with running, maybe there's a weight vest, maybe there's a slight incline, maybe there's a slight decline, which would get into sort of, you know, if you wanted to draw a comparison to dampers and things like that. So a true running education where you feel like, you know, like if someone asked you what's your pace right now, or even what's, you know, your heart rate at, or how are you feeling, how would you feel if you had to go do this other movement or this machine? You have to do a lot of work and really pay attention to what's going on in the moment, analyze data afterwards. There's so much that goes into it. And if you want to compete at a semifinals or CrossFit Games level and you don't have that education and you haven't put yourself through that, I don't even know why the fuck you're doing it at all. Like why you're there, because it's going to get ugly. And we see it, right? We see really good athletes on a running workout and you're like, oh no, is that person either walking or they got back into the stadium an hour before everybody else and now they can't do the movements, you know, sort of whatever it is. So I think the machines do a really good job of teaching us the information that we might be able to glean when we don't have a monitor. And you talking about specifics within running is something that I think a lot of people should really try to pay attention to. And there's a lot of ways to be able to do that. You know, you don't have to have the fanciest watch in the world now. I mean, you can get, you know, there's a lot of different wearables that are affordable that do give you that sort of information. So I just want to make sure that people are really hearing what you're saying in association with the running. And then Sherb sort of put a stamp on it a little bit to say, like, even down to those nitty gritty details, but that's the only way you're going to educate yourself enough to really excel at the highest level.
And it's surprising to me how many athletes don't pay attention to that type of stuff. Like, you know,
if you don't know, you don't know. You know what I mean? Like
Exactly.
It's just, when people run at my gym and my culture or this programming or this coaching staff, they just go run. And it's like, you know, typically in a lot of those programs, you'll see like really big rest periods. So it's like smash your face against the wall, run as hard as you possibly can, hopefully recover, and then do it again. Whereas, I don't know if you've noticed, Alexis, but the rest periods are significantly shorter now during pieces than they would have been, you know, potentially a handful of years ago. So that an athlete really needs to know within the context of maybe my heart rate's still up, you know, whatever it is, can I continue to work? What do my paces look like?
We're no longer in the part of the sport where we can just wing it. Like if you're trying to make the, you know, the best gains, especially with someone who's got a pretty high training age, has been doing it for a while and knows a lot about themselves, like you can't just wing it. That's going to be a really poor strategy. And it's a really easy way to throw away some of your rounds or some of your intervals and have them be no benefit to you at all. So, you know, I think that you've sort of alluded to it with your program, but you know, you don't really get many pieces without some sort of specific instruction attached to that piece to know how to execute. I think for the most part, that's helpful for you. And I think that's something that you and I have talked about before, but you know, if you don't have a coach, could you reverse engineer this, or how would you go about this if it wasn't me telling you how to approach these things? Like how do you go about these things? Maybe on a piece, maybe I forgot to write something next to it and you're like, all right, I have to figure this out for myself. How do you go about that on yourself? Or if you decide to pick a piece that maybe I didn't give you because it looked fun, how do you go about that?
Man. Okay. Well, so if I take a piece that looks fun, or if I take a piece you didn't give me, usually I ask myself, what is it that you're looking to get out of this piece? Why are you doing it? And sometimes that's
good start
because I absolutely want to blow people out of the water and see what happens. Like that means I'm going to go out hot and I'm going to try to hold on because I'm doing that piece because I think I'm better than everybody else at that piece. And I'm going to show them that I'm better than everyone else. And if I'm not, well, then I'm going to find out because I'm going to blow up really hard. You know, maybe that's the idea. Maybe it's a piece that I'm like, oh man, like I know I absolutely am terrible at sandbag carries. So this piece, what you're going to do is it's rowing. I think there was a piece that was C2 bike and sandbag carry. You're going to do your C2 bike at a certain pace, and then you're going to pick up the sandbag immediately and carry it. Okay, if that worked out fine, the next one, what you're going to do is you're going to C2 bike just a little bit faster and then pick up that sandbag immediately and carry it. And you're going to find that piece on the C2 bike where all of a sudden you're going to learn something about yourself, because you're going to pick up the sandbag and you're not going to be able to carry it. That's the only way to learn something about myself on that piece, is to find where that threshold is. Maybe that's the goal for that piece. So, but the point is, before every single piece, asking myself, what am I looking to get out of this piece? Because there's no point at this point in my career of just doing. The first 2 years, sure, just do a piece, you're going to get something out of it. Great. But once you're beyond that, you need to be very intentional with what you're doing. There needs to be something you're learning, even in my warm up. So every day when I warm up, I go down the runner for 5 minutes, I get on the ski erg for 5 minutes, and I get on the rower for 5 minutes.
Yes,
occasionally,
do it.
one of the skis or the row gets changed with the C2 bike occasionally. Now, that's not just done just to do. I can tell you on what runner in the gym what 900 watts corresponds to. 900 watts corresponds to a 5 minute per kilometer on one of my runners. 900 watts on the other runner corresponds to 6 minutes per kilometer. I know exactly what those are. I know exactly how many meters that will get me. On a really good day, on the 5 minute per kilometer one, I can get on that runner feeling perfectly fine and get 1,100 meters. On a not so great day, I'm going to get 1,030, 1,028. On the other runner, I'll be lucky to break 820 meters. Okay, so now I know that. Now I move on to the ski erg. Where am I putting my damper? What drag factor is that at? What does it feel like? Is my pull fatiguing, or is my stroke rate really high? What's happening? Is my breathing hard? Like I'm the whole time I'm just doing it at like a warm up pace, but I can learn a lot about myself in that. So every single time I'm analyzing these things, I get on the rower, I try to hold a 208, but what does that feel like? What's my stroke rate holding a 208? What damper felt good? When does it feel like I'm not continually trying to restart the flywheel? Those are opportunities where you can 15 minutes every single day. I can learn a lot about myself on these machines. Paying attention to, again, on the runner, like my cadence and my stride, things like that. How, occasionally I'll go, and then sometimes I go run on the ground, and like, how did that feel? In comparison to the runner, where, I have learned that all of a sudden it's like, oh shit, you're running on a runner. You're not used to running uphill anymore. Do you need to be doing some more uphill running? So paying attention to stuff like that, it's all opportunities to learn about yourself as an athlete and learn about how you approach machines.
Sherb and Alexis out here spreading the gospel. I feel like
tears of joy.
Yeah, tears of joy. Proud Papa over here. So Alexis, you mentioned the 3 hours that you get. We are aware that we are currently chewing into your 3 hours. So we're going to go to final thoughts now, and I'll let you listen to the three of us on our final thoughts to get an idea of how we sort of normally play this out. And I can go first. I think one thing that's important just to throw out there as like sort of my final thoughts, but then not really, is the three of us are very much on the same page in terms of like macro level principles of things that we believe in and things that we go teach. And I hear the least about the athletes who are doing the best, because Sherb is out there doing what he needs to do and you guys are getting things done. And then I just get to see this stuff on Instagram where, because I don't see the iteration like step by step, it's like mind blowing to see you move how much different now than you were before. Because I don't see the, 4 or 5 sessions a week. I see the thing that comes out the other side, and it's very cool to see when it comes to that. So it's just really awesome to have this conversation and to not have to like really pull this information out of you. It's the type of stuff that the three of us talk about that is actually being put into practice. And then the other thing that we didn't spend a ton of time on, but I think is really important, is just this concept of skill transfer. And if you're going to be spending hours and hours and hours, especially phase 3 is a perfect example. Misfits are doing the volume squat cycle right now. if you're going to spend that much time and that much energy on a movement that looks like no other movement in the entire sport, you're wasting your time. So
come on, it's variance.
You know, if the barbell is like halfway down your back and your shin's vertical and you're nowhere near below parallel, and then you wonder why you fry out in your thrusters, or it's really, you know, you have an excellent pull, you actively pull under the barbell and then you can't stand up out of your squat clean, whatever it is. You guys are really like putting an exclamation point on that concept of skill transfer. Yes, back squats can be one of the most important parts of a CrossFitters program. They can also be a gigantic fucking waste of time. So the idea that you guys are doing that and then now you get to see how that translates to these other movements is really awesome. And it shows up in different places throughout the sport. So if you are doing a lift, if you're doing a skill, if you're doing even monostructural stuff and you are maybe sort of cheating something because you don't have the skill, it's not going to translate to the sport. So taking those steps back that you guys referenced, no matter whether it's your rowing or skiing technique, you know, how you move through your gymnastics or something as easy to explain in terms of skill transfer as the back squat, it's just really important when we have these dedicated, separated sessions that it's not just old school CrossFit. Can I put my head through the wall?
Yeah, my final thoughts are ownership. I think what was really interesting about the last like 5 minutes of this podcast, where you were talking about your 15-minute warm up, which for most people is like, yeah, I went and did 5 minutes of that, 5 minutes of that, 5 minutes of that. And then I got to do all the fun stuff that I love to do. And you just rattled off like, I don't know, 40 questions you asked yourself during 15 minutes of 3 different machines. But like, that is the level of ownership that an athlete needs to have. And you might not be ready to ask yourself the amount of questions you just asked yourself, you know, or you gave us the example of what you do when you on the machines, but like, start with 1 or 2 questions. Question why you use the 2 damper on the ski erg, why you decide to go on a 5 damper on the bike erg, why do you decide that 61 RPMs is the right amount of RPMs on the assault bike? Like, those are questions you start to build upon, and you start bringing this like reservoir of questions you could ask yourself in the first, you know, I don't know, 15 minutes out of 3 hours. Help me, Hunter. Is that 1/12? Yeah, 1/12 of your entire training day.
Out while you were talking.
Yeah,
sorry.
good.
It is.
Alexis can give me the exact percentage there, but it's a small percentage of your day, but how profound that could be if you do that every single day, day after day after day, and you don't just do it for the 15-minute warm-up, but you then extrapolate that out across every single thing that you're doing, how much data you could gather in a day, a week, a phase, or a season.
I would like the listeners to kind of think macro on the podcast and note kind of the fact that we went from an athlete who's been training at an extremely high level for a very long time, has developed enough athlete IQ and kind of just self-awareness to realize that I can use almost kind of the minimum effective dose to retain an extremely high level of fitness, that within a certain period of time, I don't necessarily need to be doing thrusters and pull-ups and burpee box jump overs every single day leading up into my season, because I know for you personally, this doesn't apply to everybody, but it may only take a month or 2 of me kind of getting these movements back and ready to roll for the CrossFit season. So we have a tremendous amount of experience, athlete IQ and self-awareness on one end, and then more recently, the same athlete with all of those things that we just mentioned completely learned how to retool arguably the most foundational movement in the sport, period. And both happened at the same time. And it's kind of it's a shout out to the fact that this is a continuously iterative process for athletes looking to achieve an extremely high level of fitness. But it's also a reminder that, like, if you come to a training camp and you've heard a coach say the same thing about your snatch or your clean or your back squat, and then you come back at the next camp and it looks the same, it's like, hey, Alexis could do it. She did it. What exactly is your commitment level to getting better? Because we just had a conversation with somebody who, you know, has all of that experience, but also has enough of that kind of self-awareness to say, like, yeah, okay, if I want to continue to move the needle in the same way that I did 10 years ago, this is what needs to happen. I did it. I had a coach help me, and look at me now.
All right, Alexis, it's your turn for your final thoughts.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I think the first thing is you hear us talk a lot about how much SURP has helped me. I was someone who essentially was on my own for a lot of the time. And I had great training partners, and I got really far, and I very much was like, I don't see the point in a remote coach. I honestly, like, it's kind of the thing where I'm like, man, I think it looks so tempting to have one, but I think it's more of if I had this, I'd be better. If I, do all these things this way, I'll be better. And it's so tempting to say all those things, whereas putting in the work is the thing that actually makes you better. So, but I've learned in the last 2 years that if you are at the point where you're putting in all the work, which very few people are, at that point, having that remote coach isn't just, the golden star that makes you feel like you're doing things right, which that's what it can be. It's actually like this thing that really does push and move the needle and give you an extra set of eyes on yourself, and kind of tells you not what you like, kind of is devil's advocate. Even if you do know what you're doing and you want to, what you need to work on, your strengths, your weaknesses, how you want to approach them. They're that person that says, well, is that really how you should approach them? And they really do help out in that way. And I think that for me, that was kind of the thing that helped me get these new PRs, push the needle just that little bit further, that when I had become stagnant or had, continued to injure myself, has kind of helped with that kind of thing. So having that remote coach is definitely a huge thing. And if you are at a point where you don't have that, I think the blog's a great starting point, because like Sherb said, or like Drew said, it has all of these things that you can create a program from. But to do that, it's going to take both you on a macro level and a micro level of sitting down and saying, okay, what's the focus this cycle? And kind of laying that out for yourself. And each day when you choose what your pieces is, having that focus in mind. And when you do each particular piece, having that focus in mind.
Did we do it?
Boom.
We did it.
Great.
All right, Alexis, thank you for your time. Thank you to all the listeners for tuning into another episode, and thank you to our show sponsors. You can head to sharpentheaxecode.com, and if you would like to support Alexis's journey, use the code Alexis, and she gets a little bit of money for the CrossFit Games and all that good stuff this year. If you want to follow the programming that she's on, you can head to misfitathletics.com and get started on your 2-week free trial right now. Or I think this might have been a bit of an advertisement by accident for remote coaching. You can apply for remote coaching at misfitathletics.com. And last but not least, you can head to properfuel.co and use the code word Misfit to save on any and all orders. See you next week.